Hey everyone, welcome back to Shred the Veil. We are here again with our guest, Ray DeSteven, and he is going to take us through part two of Unveiling the Big Fat Lie. Uh, in part one, he showed us the history of, how we've evolved and how we process food in our bodies over thousands of years and what the Industrial Revolution has done specifically in the last 80 years to us with respect to food, nutrition, diet, and obesity, fat, and the narratives that they're spitting out at us that they want us to believe. So he shed a lot of light on the subject in the last episode on part one, and today we're going to kind of recap a little bit of that for anyone who did not see that, and then kind of move on to part two, where he's going to enlighten us a little more on what they're trying to feed us, figuratively and literally. So we're excited to have you back. Thanks for joining us again.
Well, thanks, Dan and Derek. Glad to be back and look forward to getting through the rest of this for your audience.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be a good one.
All right. So, Unveiling the Big Fat Lie, Part Two, my subtitle, Eat What's Natural to Humans. Always like to start off with a little something for you to think about. And this is from T.H. Huxley, who said, "The tragedy of science is the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis with an ugly fact." Well, I'll
Mhm.
start with some of the ugly facts I gave you last time. These are the sobering statistics. 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. We got 700,000 that die annually from heart disease. That's about one in five. In
Wow.
2021, 100,000 people died of diabetes, affecting 38 million people. 100 million people had prediabetes in 2024. Of course, the ravages of this are heart disease, arterial disease, where we have amputations, blindness, kidney failure. So it's no small matter. As I mentioned last time, how did we get here? And to answer that question, we have to go back in time. I'll just review some of those slides I gave you last time, where our hominin ancestors scavenged essentially animal carcasses, and by doing that, their brains grew. So you have a typical lion kill, in lion being a carnivore, and he's eating out the guts of his prey. Along comes the hyenas, jackals, who will scavenge the carcass, maybe eating the hindquarter if it's not been eaten. It's the last thing the carnivores would eat, or the lions would eat. If, if they were starving, they would eat that, but otherwise, they would just do the guts.
We're
So our
going for
forte,
they
pardon?
like the, you said they go for the organs. That's where all the
Correct.
nutrition is. Or, yeah.
Yes, they're going through all the organs, which I'll show you the next slide. Uh, but we came along after everything was nothing left essentially but the bones, and we, try to get what we could off of those. But essentially, we learned how to crack open the bones and get the marrow and crack open the brains and the skulls and get the brains. So in doing that, our brains started growing.
So at this point, we weren't really hunting for ourselves. We were scavengers. Yeah.
Right. And we're coming from being, essentially vegetarians from millions of years before that.
Okay.
So now we're on 2 feet, we're going around. Climate change has precipitated the evolution of hunting and gathering, along with the development of several species of early Homo, and I'm showing two of them here. One being Homo erectus, upright man, who lived 1.9 million years ago to about 143,000 years ago. So when you think about it, these guys have been on the planet 7 times longer than modern humans, which have been
Wow.
around 300,000 years.
Okay.
The other one I'm showing is Homo neanderthalensis, who lived from 430,000 to 40,000 years ago. And these guys had brains about the size of Homo sapiens. They were skilled tool makers. They buried their dead. They had language skills. Uh, Now they were bulkier and more muscular than sapiens and had a bigger brow and a larger nose. And that was to adapt to the cold climate of Western Europe. And now these guys were separate species that diverged genetically from us about 400,000 years ago.
Okay.
So Homo sapiens, meaning wise man, learned to kill large game, allowing us to eat the other high-fat organs, the heart, the kidneys, liver, intestines. And with this high-fat diet, our brains grew to consume about 24% of our energy requirement, yet made up only about 2% of our body weight. So again, by 300,000 years ago, various versions of Homo sapiens had evolved. To sum all this up in this evolution up, essentially it's hominin plus fat plus 2.5 million years equals you, or in this case, your sister.
Yeah.
Hominin plus fat plus a lot of time equals you. And then agriculture happened. The Natufians, who were led a semi-nomadic life around the Fertile Crescent, began harvesting the ancestor of modern wheat, known as einkorn wheat, around 9500 BC. And people became less dependent on hunting at that point.
Mm.
So we started eating more grains, never part of our evolved diet. And the lectins and phytates and these whole grains inflamed the villi of the small intestines, creating what we call today leaky gut syndrome, the cause of most of our autoimmune diseases that we know today.
And if we look at like history, that's where like recorded history kind of starts back that time frame with
Yeah.
Sumer and all the ancient
Yeah.
civilizations
Well,
with agriculture basically started the formation of the, advancement of cities and things like that for social culture, I suppose.
correct. Yeah. Yep. Thousands of years later. But as people got together, they became and they're more prone to, climate changes, things, weather changes, droughts, and as they got animals closer together, we came up more of the diseases, more common back then, and plagues and all that kind of thing. So it's pretty nasty, actually. Well, if we fast forward to just 75 years ago, when after cherry picking 6 countries from his quote 22 country study, guy named Ansel Keys published his bogus results in 1951 to convince us that ingesting fat caused heart disease. The trouble is, this has never been proven by any study, ever. And I'm showing here his 6 country study. Sometimes it's called 7 country study. But it's percent of calories from fat versus coronary heart disease deaths. And you can see in his notion, the more fat you ate, the more heart disease deaths you had. Now, all these other 16 data points aren't showing up on here. There are a couple I've shown here, France and Finland, which are nowhere near that curve, as you can see. So he was hailed as the most important nutrition scientist of the 20th century by Time magazine. Here's a 1961 cover.
And in the first part one of your presentation, you actually showed all the missing data points that were there that really don't draw that straight line there. That correlation
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
exist
pretty.
unless you remove all the rest of the data. Then you can pick out this line, right? So it's
Yeah,
totally manipulated.
it's pretty random. You'll see that later in this thing, where I point out something else. So, anyways, Keyes convinced the American Heart Association that his what he called diet heart hypothesis should prevail. And he advised cutting dietary fat from the then current average of about 40% to 15%, with saturated fat cut from about 17% to 4%. And this led to the USDA's crowning achievement, the 1980 food pyramid, which was not drawn up by dietitians, but by a government agency. And what we see here at the bottom of the pyramid, you're advised to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, pasta, crackers, and then get 3 to 5 servings of veggies, and then 2 to 4 servings of fruit, and then some minor amounts of meat, dairy, yogurt, so forth. So essentially, we're promoting 11 to 20 servings of carbs and sugar a day. And the result is this graph by the Center for Disease Control showing percent of people overweight and obese in the US. So we ended up with what we ended up with was a fatter and sicker population. So if you look here between 1960 and 1980, when the food pyramid came out, we essentially were about 47% overweight and obese. And then after 1980, Zoom, we go up on a different trajectory. And only shows to 2010, but by 2010, we were already 3/4 of us were overweight or obese. Sad
Wow,
commentary.
what a shift! Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So with that as the backdrop, and that's what we went over last week or last time, let's talk about the macronutrients. All right. We have 3 protein. Our body converts proteins to amino acids. These are needed for tissue growth, energy production, immune function, and nutrient absorption. Carbohydrates we convert to sugar, glucose, that is, and it's used as an energy source. Fats we break down to fatty acids, which are needed for cell membranes, tissue metabolism, hormone signaling, and also an energy source. So, start with protein. So, I don't know if you guys probably haven't seen the rerun of The Blob, the 1958 sci-fi thriller was starring Steve McQueen. And so the blob is just like this giant slime mold that's attacking everybody.
Okay.
And for those old enough who've seen this thing, the final scene is the slime mold is retreating from underneath the doorways and so forth, and everybody inside in this restaurant thinks they're safe. And then the last scene, the camera pans out and it shows that the blob is totally engulfing this whole restaurant. And so, anyways, what I want to talk about is slime molds. So in 2010, experiments were done with slime molds. They put little dabs of with protein, or protein with sugar, or all sugar, and they let the slime molds go and start moving across the table to see what they would eat. And so what happened was they chose generally protein to carbs in a ratio of about 2 to 1. This is a rather remarkable achievement when you think about it, given that they have neither a brain or a spinal cord.
Right.
Well, so then they did experiments on cockroaches, locusts, spider monkeys, and gorillas. They found the same thing. So what they found was that creatures will eat, or in some cases overeat, other nutrients until they meet their protein requirement.
Mm,
Now, they tried to do this with, well, they didn't try to do this with humans because they couldn't do such an experiment with human beings, but they did
right.
lock a whole bunch of them up in a hotel. They gave them anything they wanted to eat, so you had a big spread there. It's kind of like going on a cruise, I guess.
Yeah, right.
However, it was fascinating. So what they chose were foods that gave them about 20% protein. Now they might have overeaten any other stuff too, but they knew without anybody prompting them to tell them what to eat or anything else. That's what they came up with. And so it turns out that that's what our the human need is, and we got that right. So the essential amino acids, there's 21 amino acids. We make only 12 in sufficient quantities. We got to get the other 9 from our diet. And so they're called essential.
Mm.
Not because they're more essential than the other 12, just that they're essential to get from our diet.
So we
So
don't get them. Yeah. Yeah.
the plant sources are kind of incomplete proteins. No one plant contains all these essential amino acids. Now, this is not a problem if you're a meat eater because you'll get them all. So the recommended daily requirement for protein is about 15 to 20% of our calories. So they got this right. And that works out to about 0.8 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So it's a function of how much body weight you have. Now, if you work out a lot and you're a bodybuilder, you're going to need a lot more. You're on the upper end of that, essentially.
Right.
So I want you to note that protein, when it's eaten in excess of the body's daily requirement, is converted by the liver to sugar in a process called gluconeogenesis, which literally is read in reverse, make new sugar. So we need our 20% or 24%, whatever it turns out to be. But once you think you're going to get bigger and bulkier just by eating a bunch of protein, it's not going to happen because your body's going to convert it. So if 20% of protein is correct, and they tell us to limit our fat to 20 to 35% of our calories, what's left? Well, the only thing left is carbs, of course. There's no other choice. So if we look on the right here at the recommended modern diet since 1980, they tell us to eat fat at the level of 20 to 35% of our calories, protein 15 to 20%. That means they're telling us to eat 1/2 to 2/3 of our calories as carbohydrate.
Wow.
Now, if you compare that to the primitive diet I show on the left, they ate fat in the ratio of about 65 to 70%, protein 20 to 25%, and the minor amount left being carbs was about 5 to 15%.
So for thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, we humans have been eating um, basically the food pyramid flipped on its head in reverse, essentially.
Yeah, well, for over 2 million years, it's been going
2 million.
on.
Okay. Yeah. And now since 1980, we decided that's all wrong. We better switch it up, right?
Yep, because someone said fat was bad. Yes, let's talk about carbohydrate. So, we're supposed to eat your fruits and vegetables, and this has been the dietary advice since 1977 because before the food pyramid came out, they already had guidelines out in 1977. So, eat your fruits and vegetables, but based on what studies? And if you said none, please go to the head of the class because there weren't any. There also
Wow.
were studies to show we should eat 6 to 11 servings a day of grains as given in the food pyramid. No studies.
Hmm.
Okay, let's take vegetables. So mom said, eat your vegetables. Well, guys, what's wrong with this picture?
Mm. They're not vegetables, right?
Correct. So corn's a grain, green beans is a legume, and we have two fruits, tomatoes and avocados. By the way, eat all the avocados you want and have at it. So vegetables look like this. They're 95% water. They contain micronutrients, polyphenols, antioxidants. Eat them till your heart's content. Fruits are sugar bombs, are loaded with fructose. Fructose is converted immediately by the liver to glucose or blood sugar. Fruits have been bred for their sugar content. Um, in Neolithic times, fruit had no more sweetness than probably that of a carrot, unless you ran across the beehive and got some honey and knew how to get rid of the bees by smoking them out. So, what is the minimum daily requirement for carbohydrate? Don't bother to calculate. The answer is astonishingly enough, zero. So, carbohydrate is not an essential component of the human diet. There's no known medical condition that is caused by deficiency of dietary carbohydrate.
Hmm.
Carbs in the body have only two fates. Either you use it as energy source or you store it as fat. No other way. Dietary advice since 1977 is to get half to two-thirds of your calories from something that is not even required by the human body. I'm not saying don't
Wow.
ever eat carbs, but
Wow.
here's some
Yeah.
folks that didn't eat them. The Inuits, and I'll mention these guys later also. So in 1927, W.A. Thomas reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association on 142 Inuit who lived entirely on meat, that is caribou, seal, and whale, no fruits or vegetables. They had no evidence of cancers, heart disease, hypertension, rickets, scurvy, or kidney disease until the West Indian Company introduced dried potatoes, flour, canned goods, and cereal grains. And today, cancer is the leading cause of death. Tuberculosis is rife, type 2 diabetes rampant, and the life expectancy is 11 years less than the Canadian average. So
Wow.
within one generation of eating a Western diet, every native hunter-gatherer population throughout the world has become fat and sick, just like in the US and Europe. And I'd say some of them, or a lot of them, or I didn't say not most of them, all of them. You can't point to a single uh, ancient group or modern group that became in the modern times that switched to our Western diet and didn't get sick and fat.
Mm. Yeah.
And here's John Montague, the fourth Earl of Sandwich. He's credited with inventing the sandwich in 1742. He was a compulsive gambler. He didn't want to leave the gambling table, so he asked his servants to slap a piece of meat between two slices of bread so he could eat and still play cards. And we've been
Hmm.
suffering ever since for centuries now. Every time we eat, especially lunch, we don't just eat a piece of meat or something. We're eating a lot of bread and grains,
Throw the
essentially.
bread on it. Yep. Hmm.
So you can blame the Earl of Sandwich on that one. This brings us to the hawking of orange juice, which I'm familiar with. So here's Albert Lasker. He's the marketeer par excellence who was hired, one of the first marketers, you might say, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And he worked for the Sunkist and the orange juice growers. And he says, man, you guys got this all wrong. You're trying to sell oranges. Don't sell oranges. Sell orange juice. There's three oranges in every glass. And so here you see some of his advertising for orange juice. He also was hired by the American Tobacco Company here in Richmond uh, to market cigarettes. Like here you see a pack of Lucky Strikes, and what he first realized is, hey, women aren't smoking. That's half our audience here. We got men.
Mm.
Men are smoking, but not the women. So he started doing commercials like this, showing the women on the pack and all that kind of stuff. He also came up with the phrase LSMFT. And if some of your audience is old enough, they'll know that this means Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
Okay.
So I'll also show here Anita Bryant, Miss America runner-up in 1959. Uh, so when I was young and ready to be a teenager and so forth in the 60s, I watched my Saturday morning cartoon, and then we'd see Anita Bryant selling oranges, and I'd watch Lassie, and I'd see Anita Bryant selling more oranges. And so she ended up in the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame in 1988. And unfortunately, she just passed away 2 months ago, back in December. So I
Hmm.
got to watch her every morning. Tell us, and then, as far as I knew, the only way you can get vitamin C is if you ate an orange. I think most people understood that way too.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
the
so go
the
ahead.
indoctrination through advertising of pushing on the American public whatever they want, regardless of what is good for you or not, right?
Yeah, and it started decades and decades ago. So here's my new equation: grains plus sugar equals obesity and disease for your kids. So this is 1965 boxes, cereal boxes. We have Kellogg's Sugar Pops, Kellogg's Sugar Smacks, which are sugar toasted puffs of wheat, it says. And if you buy them, you actually get a sonic wave gun also. And then there's Kellogg's Sugar Frosted Flakes, and as Tony Tiger would say, they are
Great.
great. There you go. Oh, I was hoping you'd chime in on that one. Very good. Now, I get another thrill for you. I'm going to sing the Sugar Pops jingle. Are you ready for this? Oh, the pops are sweeter and the taste is too. They're shot with sugar through and through. Kellogg's sugar cone pops. Sugar pops are tops. This has been burned into my memory for the last 65 years. You
Sugar,
can
sugar,
Wow.
sugar. Yeah.
think I'm kidding. Here's Sugar Pops Pete right on the box top there. He's shooting sugar right on the pops. Now, since
Nice.
2014, when they came out with this whole thing, notion that, well, you should limit sugars and all that kind of stuff, at least they figured that out. Here's what the 2025 sugar boxes look like. The sugar's off the box, but it's still inside, as I'll show you in a minute. So
Same
now
product. Yeah.
it's not sugar corn pops anymore, it's just corn pops. However, you'll see the little notation here, it says sweet, crispy crunch. And I'm going to show you in a minute how they got the sweet, crispy crunch in there. And
Wow.
instead of sugar smacks, they're honey smacks. Instead of sugar frosted flakes, they're just frosted flakes. And you see now the studious Tony the Tiger who's asking, who is Jackie Robinson?
Of course.
So 2 months ago, I was in the supermarket and I grabbed a box of corn pops, and I decided to look at the label, and here's what I found. I'm not making this up. First, you'll notice that there's sugar in three forms. There's just sugar, there's corn syrup, and there's molasses. This is all sugar. And then you also see here it says hydrogenated coconut, soybean, and cottonseed oil. Well, hydrogenated oils are trans fats. And you might wonder, now you'll notice here under trans on the right, it says trans fat, 0 grams. Well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
You're showing up the ingredient. There's three trans fats in the ingredients, but it says no trans fat.
Yeah.
Well, instead of banning trans fat as they did in Denmark, the FDA chose to enforce labeling requirements in 2006. So they did have to put it on the labels, reluctantly, by the way. They
Oh,
never
okay.
did. They never really did ban trans fat. So they cut a deal in 2015 with the manufacturers. So they said, if you limit trans fats to 0.5 grams per serving, then they could round out and show zero trans fat on their labels. So what did they do? Of course, they reduced the serving size.
Right. You just modify the number on the serving and you can have as much as you want.
So the scam continues. So you also see here the total carbs, just 36 grams. Well, that just converts to sugar pretty immediately. And then the added sugar is 15 grams. So they've now in 2020-25, the USDA guideline is to limit added sugar, meaning sugars added during processing, to 10% of your total calories per day. So 50 grams on a 2,000, that's 50 grams on a 2,000 calorie a day intake. And last but not least, it has contains a bioengineered food ingredient. Well, that's a GMO or a genetically modified organism, something the human body has no idea what to do with. None. Never seen it before, doesn't how to. So There you have it. There's our modern day breakfast of champions.
Yeah. And so what your body does is just turns the GMO foods into waste and you can't process it. What?
Well, it doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
Genetically, it's never seen it before. We're still dealing with grains from 11,000 years ago. Now they're giving us something else, which makes up about 5% of it that we've never seen before. So, of course, they say it's perfectly okay for us.
Hmm.
You guys might have missed this little headline. U.S. farmers have been caught feeding red Skittles to their cattle.
What?
Hundreds of thousands of Skittles were found covering the Dodge County Highway. Leaky truck filled exclusively with red Skittles were on their way to local farms to be used as cattle feed. How about them apples? So it used to be said, the saying was, Mom used to tell us, you are what you eat. Well, the new adage for the 21st century is, you are what you ate. So first of all, if they're
Yeah.
eating corn and all the grains and you're getting lectins and phytates, that's what they ate, that's what you get. And now it's Skittles. So I don't know where they go from there. Cows eating Skittles.
Wow.
Gas station. Now, in my day, the gas station used to be a gas station. You pump gas. In fact, you didn't even pump it. A attendant came out and he'd pump your gas, wipe your windshield, and check your oil, all for the same price. And now we've converted all of them into what we call convenience stores, which I would say are just essentially a sugar shack,
Yeah.
full
You
of
can't
sugar.
find anything on the shelves that's not just processed, full of sugar, full of
Absolutely.
GMOs, garbage. Yeah.
So I go in if somebody go in and they come back out and they got a Coca-Cola or some soft drink and a bag of chips. And I say, they say, "Oh, I know, it's just wasted calories." And I go, "No, they're not wasted at all. They're making you fatter and sicker, exactly what they're designed to do. They're not
Yep.
wasted at all."
They serve a purpose. Not a good one.
All right, so that's a little complicated slide, but I'll just talk to you about inflammation a bit. So all this sugar and all what we're eating results in high blood sugar, and that which causes inflammation. So what happens is the glucose in the bloodstream binds with proteins in the process called glycosylation or just glycation, forming free radicals called advanced glycation end products, fittingly acronym AGE, because that's exactly what it does is ages you.
Okay.
So these free radicals are essentially molecular fragments that are looking for an electron in their outer shell to make them stable. So it's kind of like a pinball machine for hopefully most of your audience knows what a pinball machine is. Maybe some of the younger folks don't. Essentially, a silver goes flying in and it just starts bopping around and bing, bing, bang, and you get points as it bangs around. And when the bumpers are lit up, you get all these extra points. And all of a sudden, this thing goes so fast you can't even see it going. And that's kind of what it's like when you have a free radical bouncing off your uh, off your arteries and so forth. It's damaging the arteries, and then it'll hit what's a something like vitamin C or something that kind of quenches that free radical and starts stopping the chain. Well, this all occurs in like milliseconds.
Mm.
So this is bam, 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 bam. You can't even see it. So if you had a free radical bouncing around on your pinball machine, you would never have time to flip those flippers to keep it going because it's all goes down in milliseconds. So, anyways, this glycation is the same thing that browns hot cross buns, chicken skin, and your skin, and damages your skin. So these advanced glycation products cause atherosclerosis, cataracts, dementia, kidney damage, joint stiffness, rheumatoid arthritis, and skin aging. So there's nothing good about sugar.
Okay. Wow.
In fact, I'm going to show you here, but hopefully I can get the point across on this thing. So here we have with a blood a glucose tolerance test and a fat tolerance test, where you give the patient 100 grams of glucose and see what happens to the blood sugar. The same thing with the equivalent of that, which is 40 grams of fat.
Okay.
So first thing you want to notice is like on the first graph, they're plotting plasma glucose blood sugar versus time. And you'll see the one flat curve there, or the dots, the fat tolerance test. So what you notice is when you eat fat, it doesn't pump up your blood sugar. There's nothing there. And same, so insulin, what happens is when you have the high blood sugar, the glucose in the blood, you, the pancreas, beta cells in the pancreas spit out insulin, so it drive that sugar into your cells. Of course, what doesn't go into your cells ends up being stored as fat. So here on
Okay.
this the right-hand graph is insulin versus time. So the fat tolerance test doesn't raise fat doesn't raise glucose, and it doesn't raise insulin because it doesn't
So
need it.
yeah, fat's the bottom line on both the graphs. It's relatively
Right.
flat. Doesn't really get impacted. Yeah.
So now when you look at sugar on the first graph, you see the spike in the sugar, and it takes about 90 minutes for it to go down to the previous levels, normal level, at around, say, 6 millimoles per liter. If you look over on the right, though, where the insulin level is, the insulin level is still sky high. Well, you've already got your sugar under, in check, but the uh, insulin is still sky high. So it doesn't drop for 2 hours later. So now you got 2 hours worth of insulin still pumping in there, trying to get your glucose level down. Well, what it does is it drives it down very low, and now you're feeling like jittery, and you need to eat some sugar because your blood sugar is so low. And so your bagel you had in the morning before you went to work kicked up your glucose level, and now it's crashing, and you're crashing, and now you grab the Pop Tart, you pop them in the toaster at 10 or 11 o'clock, and now you're on your way to what's known as the yo-yo diet, where your blood sugar level goes up and down like a yo-yo. So you have this glycemic spike. Now, the body can store about 100 grams of sugar as glycogen in the liver and another 300 to 400 in the muscles. But after that, if you're not burning it, you're storing it as fat. That's why you muscle guys working out at the gym there know that the time if you're going to cheat and eat a little carbs is probably within a half hour after your workout, because that's when you're that's not going to be stored as sugar, but it's going to be the glucose is going to be stored in your liver or muscles. All right. And this from the American Diabetes Association website 2015.
2025.
How it says, excuse me, 2025. How food affects blood glucose. All food affects your blood glucose, that is blood sugar, but some have a bigger impact than others, such as foods high in simple carbs, high in fat, and high in calories. Well, I just showed you how fat doesn't affect your glucose level at all.
Yeah.
But here they're throwing in fat along with the carbs. So they're trying to make out like fat's still the bad guy, but as opposed to just being carbs. Now here's a graph from the Center for Disease Control on diabetes. And it's showing from 1968 to 2015, the percentage with diabetes on the left and the number of folks with diabetes in millions on the right. So how about if we go back in time to 2015 and let's pretend that we're on the board of directors of the American Diabetes Association. Now, I've just elected myself chairman, of course.
Of course.
So, Derek, I see you got the latest CDC report. How did we do last year regarding the increase or decrease in diabetes?
Well, if you're just telling me to look from 2015 and we're projecting out to last year, it looks like we're not doing so great.
Yeah, so it looks like from 2012 to 15, we're at the same trajectory as we've been for the last 45 years, 35 years, whatever it shows there.
Yeah.
Also, they had this, they've drawn in this line, like they're making some kind of prediction for us. Like, it seems to be like even steeper than what we're showing. What do you make of that?
It follows the trend. It's exponential shift. Uh, you know,
I mean,
that's
how
been
dare they
happening.
think that, they know what's up ahead. We're the expert here, after all. We're the American Diabetes Association. So, Dan, I noticed that you've put some things on this graph. You got the food pyramid there in 1980. And then what else?
Yes. That 10 years after the food pyramid came out, there's a trend. Instead of doing a gradual increase, now it's like an exponential shot a rocket shooting off there.
That's very revealing because it looks like from 1968 or 50, excuse me, 58 till about 1990, we're at one trajectory as far as increase in diabetes. And from 1990 on, it's a lot steeper curve. And the experts tell us, including the ADA, that it takes like 7 to 10 years for us to recognize that we actually have diabetes, and it shows up.
Mm.
So that's a very revealing curve there.
Hmm. Wonder the coincidence, the food pyramid in 1980. Yeah. Uh-huh. Hmm.
Yeah, so I'd like to propose something here, and I propose that I'll just make a motion that the ADA recommend the same high carb diet that we've been recommending for the past 35 years. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
I
Can I hear? All right, I want to hear all the ayes. So we'll just continue on doing what we've been doing and see if we can come up with a better result. So
regard. Yeah.
I try to guess what the ADA's mission statement might be, and I thought it might be something about preventing and curing diabetes. And sure enough, I looked it up, and it says to prevent and cure diabetes and improve lives of all people affected by diabetes. That's a very noble mission statement and one that seems right on the money of what they should be doing. Also, when I was looking on the website, it said they gave what they call the low-fat meal pattern. So the low-fat meal pattern is great for people who are looking to reduce the risk of diabetes or lose weight. The low-fat meal pattern highlights are the following, and they show vegetables, which I say to that, okay. Fruits, as we just heard, the sugar bombs. Carbohydrate says, for example, breads, crackers, pasta, whole grains, starchy vegetables. Well, all that just converts to sugar, some of it before even leaving your tongue. If you keep a piece of bread on your tongue for a while, you'll start noticing this sweeter taste of it. It says eat some lean proteins, including beans. Well, again, here's more carbs, including lectins and phytates in the legumes and beans. Low-fat dairy products. Well, as you know, all the low-fat dairy products, they took the fat out and they replaced it with sugar or sugar substitutes. So this is what the American Diabetes Association is telling us in 2025 we should eat. That's going to make a difference in that chart you just saw.
Wow.
And of course, they use the same bogus 1970s USDA dietary advice to limit your fat to 30% and saturated fat to less than 10%. Pretty amazing, huh?
Huh.
Sounds
Yeah. I
great.
mean, that graph didn't change anyone's mind or make anyone think or sound any alarms. It just,
Well, it's been going on
um,
for 35 years. And there,
wow.
and there they
That's the,
are. Now, remember, this graph goes to 2015. We're talking 10 years later. So
yeah.
10 years later, here's what they're still recommending.
Wow.
I don't have the rest of that graph, but I imagine the last 10 years is not pretty.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's no chronic diseases again on a diet of fat, as Chalmers Stefansson proved, otherwise known as William Stevenson. He was a Harvard anthropologist whose food failed to arrive for our 1906 Arctic expedition. He explored and lived on an Inuit diet for over 9 years, eating exclusively caribou, which is for 6 or 9 months. Then he had 6 months of salmon and a month of eggs in the spring. No fruits or vegetables. What they liked about when they ate all this fat, they liked the deposits behind the back of the eyes, along the jaw. They were mostly prized, followed by the head, heart, kidneys, and shoulder. Now, the lean tenderloin was fed to the dogs, again, unless they were starving. Now, upon his
But
return, he and his colleagues were subjected themselves to a year-long experiment where they ate only fat and were continuously monitored in a hospital. And essentially, they proved that they would not get scurvy. So, said Stevenson, the chief occasion for vegetables with most Eskimos was famine. The result, no scurvy, no hardening of the arteries, no high blood pressure, no kidney issues or rheumatism. Well, you might ask, how is this possible? I mean, don't we need vitamin C and D to prevent scurvy and rickets? Well, yes, we do. And Stefan's son and the Inuit got plenty. So here I'm showing comparison of an apple, a liver, and carrots and the nutrition you get from those. This is in grams per 100 grams of protein. So the first thing you'll notice is that, and I won't read them off, but the liver gives you 10 to 100 times more of all these vitamins and minerals than does the apple or the carrots. And you can see also there's plenty of vitamin C. You don't need Anita Bryant's orange juice. There's 3 to 4 times vitamin C in liver than there is in an apple and a carrot.
Wow.
And vitamin D, which again, living up there in the far north, they're not getting much sunlight. So how they getting vitamin D? Well, liver had that too. So scurvy and rickets were not a problem for those folks. I mean,
Sweet.
2.2 pounds of meat contains about 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. Now remember, our distant cousins weren't voracious meat eaters, that we have to call them meat eaters, but they were really voracious fat eaters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
lastly, yeah, go ahead.
they knew what they were doing. I mean, I mean, the liver knocks everything off the chart, everything else.
Yep. So we're often told about, the latest superfood, like acai berries, it's a superfood, and ancient grains or kale or whatever. But the most nutritious food on the planet is liver, and all those other organ meats are not far behind. Here's another guy. So it's the same thing, Dr. Otto Schaefer. He was an Arctic pioneer, and he examined 4,000 Canadian Inuit on Baffin Island off the coast of Greenland. He saw no signs of vitamin or mineral deficiency despite absence of fruits and vegetables in their diets. He had concluded that asthma, ulcers, gout, cancer, coronary heart disease, diabetes, ulcerative colitis were nearly non-existent. He noted that communities who stopped eating traditional food and ate what they call the civilized foods of modern man, such as flour, biscuits, tea, and molasses, which were brought in by the Hudson Bay Company, saw their health decline in a single generation, with women and children suffering from anemia, ear infections, and tooth decay. So between 1974 and 1976, the death rate from ischemic heart disease among men aged 45 to 65 in Greenland was just 5.3%. That's 8 times less than the US, where the death rate was 40.4%.
Wow.
And they're eating fat, what we're not supposed to eat, says Ansel
Yeah.
Keys.
Right.
So now we come to the vaunted Mediterranean diet and what they call the French paradox, which you might have heard in the news. So if you look at Mediterranean diet, which we're all supposed to eat these days, it'll show that you should be eating fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, fish, and shellfish, all to the good. But they make no mention of butter, pork fat, fat meats, bacon, etc. Pates, which are over 50% fat, sausage, salami, chorizo, over 50% fat, cheeses that are 60 to 80% fat, cream that's 35% fat. That's all the stuff that the French eat that they don't mention.
Right.
The French paradox. So there's the paradox. So since the French are famous for eating these fats and having low heart disease, they are considered a paradox. Well, there's also the Italian paradox because, as you guys know, when we went over to Italy, they were eating a lot of cured meats: salami, capicola, soppressata, pancetta, porchetta, brujol. They ate full-fat cheeses like Parmigiano Reggiano, mozzarella, and ricotta. So they must be it must be an Italian paradox. Well, there's actually a whole bunch of paradoxes. We're back to that graph that Ansel shows fat calories as a percentage of total calories versus coronary deaths. And you can see here, way up the top, the U.S. Eats a lot of fat and they have a lot of heart disease. But we also have what I would say is the Austrian paradox, the Norwegian paradox, the Swedish paradox, the Danish paradox, and the German paradox. Because all these guys are down here at 1/3 of the heart disease and they have eating about the same amount of fat.
The real paradox is is the US. They're the outlier. Everyone else
Correct.
is, right in the same,
Yeah.
these European countries, they're doing something much better than we are, apparently.
Yeah. So the paradox explained. So essentially, the higher the fat intake, the lower the carbs, the less cardiovascular disease. So the graph on the right is total fat and animal protein intake versus actual total cardiovascular disease in women. So if you go up high on this chart, like at 200, you see that the high fat, you have low heart disease. If If you go down to like 50 or 100, you scroll over to the right, you see that you have low fat, you have high heart disease. So just the opposite of what they were telling us. And the second
Mm,
graphic has energy percent intake from carbs versus mortality, heart disease mortality in women. So the lower the carbs, the lower the heart disease. The higher the carbs, the higher the heart disease.
wow.
Paradox explained. It's not
Yep.
about the fat, it's about the carbs.
Yeah. I was just in the
Right.
slide before that one graph with all the different countries. That was the graph from the beginning where they had that one line that Ansel Keys he picked just those 6 data points to make his fictitious curve, right?
Right,
That's the same
right.
one. Okay.
You
Just so
pick the
people
six
can
and this is the
make that
rest of them.
correlation.
Right,
Yeah.
that's the rest of them.
Wow. Okay.
That brings us to the once banned lowly egg. Okay, so looking at the nutrition of two medium eggs, it's about 100 grams. Let's start with the egg whites. Well, the egg whites are pure protein. You get about 12 grams for your size body weight, for example, you'd need about 23 or 4 grams a day. You're halfway home to protein. But that's if you eat it with the egg yolk. If you don't eat it with the egg yolk, you're only absorbing about 17%. So it's way different if you don't eat the whole egg. And of course, we've had for decades now restaurants saying we can get egg white only. So a couple
Right.
of weeks or months ago, when I was at Bob Evans, which is his original farm is about a half hour from my boyhood home, and I got the menu and I looked on there and I pulled this out of the menu. It says substitute egg whites for 50 cents. So now you can get egg whites only, please, and you'll pay extra for way less nutrition. So what's the rest of that nutrition? It's all in the yolk. As you can see
Yeah.
here listed, all the vitamins, minerals are in the yolk. Also contains a vitamin D. Uh, it's the most potent source after cod liver oil. Lecithin, a cholesterol emulsifier, and docosahexaenoic acid, and omega-3 fatty acid. So you're getting all that stuff in the egg yolk, some protein in the whites, and my only suggestion is eat the whole egg because that's
Yeah.
what you get it all then. So just something about fatty acids. So we hear about saturated fat and monosaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat. Essentially, all foods contain all of them. There are all three types of fatty acids that are included. There's no exceptions. But what we call saturated fats, when we get it from like animals like chicken fat or duck fat, lard, you see the amount. And the biggest one is coconut oil at 90%, 92%. So they have more saturated fat, but they also have a lot of monounsaturated fat, also good for you. And there's some amount much smaller of polyunsaturated fats, which the body also needs, but in small amounts. Then you have monounsaturated fats, most well known, well as avocado oil, but there's olive oil, which a lot of people use for cooking, which is fine. It's about 75% monounsaturated. And then the polyunsaturated fats from canola oil to sesame, cottonseed, soybean still has some saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, but mostly polyunsaturated fats. So chemically speaking, I didn't want to get too much into chemistry, but saturated fatty acids look like this. It's a straight chain. This is stearic acid. Uh, it's saturated, meaning each carbon is saturated with the most amount of hydrogens it can handle.
Hmm.
And it's in a straight chain. So it packs tightly and it's solid at room temperature and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Monounsaturated saturated fats have one double bond. And this double bond is weaker, actually, than a single bond. And so it's not as stable. It's more easily damaged. And it's also kink. So at the double bond, it's kink. So if you can imagine each side of that double bond, it's kind of at an angle like an airplane wings. It's not just a straight thing. And that part of the reason why it's less stable.
Hmm.
If you go to polyunsaturated fats, they have more than one double bond. This is linoleic acid, omega-6 fatty acid. And you see it has a cis structure, meaning the same. So that means the hydrogens are on the same side of this double bonds. Now, the molecule itself, if you look at it, it's called omega-6 fatty acid. And if we look at it from right to left, the alpha side on the right and the omega side on the left, in the Greek, alpha, alpha, from the alpha to the omega, the beginning in the end. So on the alpha side, we have carboxylic acid, and then on the other side, we have just the hydrogen. So if you go 6 carbons from the omega end, the left side, you see a double bond. That's the first double bond. So it's called omega-6 fatty acid for that reason. Omega-3 fatty acid would have that first double bond, 3 carbons from the left. Now, if you have a fat that has hydrogens on both sides of the double bond, it's called a trans fat, trans being meaning across, not same like cis. So that's the trans fat, and these are man-made and very bad for us. And I'll just show you that here. So the only bad fats, we always talk about good fats and bad fats. They've been talking about this for decades, and they assume that they call, of course, saturated fat bad. And so, but really the only bad fats, either altered or damaged fats. So let's talk about altered fats.
And you just showed that the saturated fat was the most stable one, so all the other fats are more likely to be damaged fats, right?
Correct. So start with altered fats. So in 1902, the German scientist Wilhelm Norman patented the process of hydrogenating liquid oils to make them solid at room temperature. So he originally had this idea to make soap, but Procter & Gamble acquired the U.S. rights. And so they crystallized cottonseed oil. They named it Crispo, and then later changed it to Crist, but then it had a bad kind of religious connotation. Some people might confuse that. And so they ended up with Crisco. And it replaced lard, butterfat, and beef tallow since the 1920s. So since that time, trans fats were ubiquitous in the American food supply, I mean, for the next 100 years, including
Yeah.
in every processed food from cookies, crackers, potato chips, cake mix, canned goods, all to give them a good big shelf life.
Mm. Even
So
flies won't land on it.
oh yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe some of your audience has been out there on a picnic and had the margarine sitting out. Well, you'll never see a fly. I can guarantee they never saw a fly land on it because even they know that's not real food. That's how bad it is. That gets
Wow.
damaged fat. So frying with any fat above its smoke point essentially damages the fat and creates inflammatory and carcinogenic compounds. So unfortunately, the commercial polyunsaturated oils or seed oils have already been damaged in their creation by applying high heat and pressure during extraction, and then by denaturing them and then deodorizing because they smell so bad after that. So they're already heated up to over 300 degrees. Now, when we get they'd already been damaged. So frying them with double essentially doubles down on inflammatory compounds. So you go to the Jackson County Fair in Ohio and you get your deep fried oysters, not so good. Of course, on a daily basis, we're eating French fries or deep fried. Just a lot of bad stuff coming out of those. So clear shelf of all polyunsaturated seed oils, including canola oil, which is short for Canada oil, is originally called rapeseed oil, which is what it is, but no one thought they could sell rapeseed, so they called it Canada oil or canola. Also get rid of corn oil, sunflower, safflower, soybean, peanut oil, linseed oil, all that stuff. Get it out. Oh, here's a Time magazine cover again. This one, 2014. Butter exonerated after 53 years of telling us to eat trans fat, aka margarine. How about that? So it says scientists labeled fat the enemy. Why they were wrong.
Finally.
And here in February 2015, from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, extra dietary cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern. Well, did you guys get a recall notice for that from the government? Had you heard about that? You know, when car manufacturers, they get something goes wrong, like the Ford Pinto had defective fuel tanks. Didn't they make them get a recall and they had to turn them all back in and you could exchange your tank out?
Right, right.
You get a recall for this? Did you hear about cholesterol was not a nutrient of concern?
Huh.
It says the Government Advisory Committee reversed the previous guidance on limiting dietary cholesterol. Rethinking cholesterol. The report says dietary cholesterol is not considered a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. Well. How about that?
No appreciable relationship between heart disease and how much cholesterol you eat. Wow. This one was it? This was 2015?
February 2015. But it still recommends eating less saturated fat. limiting it to 10% of total calories. Now, why would they do that? It's their whole gig was that saturated fat contained cholesterol. Now they're still telling us to limit it. When they just told us that cholesterol is not the problem. No, 25% of your brain is cholesterol. Every cell of the body makes its own cholesterol. If you know, don't have enough, your liver is happy to make some more for you. So why do they still say to limit saturated fat when the original hypothesis was that saturated fat contained cholesterol? Cholesterol caused heart attacks. So cholesterol is exonerated, but we're still supposed to limit saturated fat, which contains it. So if cholesterol is good, then why are Americans still scammed out of $20 billion a year on statin drugs whose sole purpose is to lower blood cholesterol?
Right.
Well, maybe that's what the
Well,
issue
that's
is.
why.
$20
Yep.
billion of
$20 billion industry of statin drugs for cholesterol. That's why that paragraph contradicts itself.
pretty much. Okay, the meta-analysis by the British Medical Journal 2016. Its conclusion. In people over 60, those with the highest low-density lipoprotein levels live the longest. Air quote, since elderly people with high LDL cholesterol live as long or longer than those with low LDL cholesterol, our analysis provides reason to question the validity of the cholesterol hypothesis. Why you think? Said another way, if you lower your cholesterol level with polyunsaturated fats, which it does, people are more likely to die.
Mm.
So the bottom line, increased polyunsaturated fat intake equals reduced cholesterol level. We're supposed to be happy about that, but also equals increased risk of death. So the
Wow.
big fat lie, since healthy eating was introduced in the 1980s, the establishment has tried to show that a diet high in animal fat is harmful, yet not a single clinical trial has ever managed to do that.
And all other data shows otherwise.
Yep. So I'm just going to go through with you now, kind of what you should eat. Quickie thing. I think most of our audience knows this, but I'll go through these briefly. Meats, eat pasture-raised beef. It doesn't have the antibiotics and hormones that the other stuff does, whether it's beef, chicken, duck, quail, rabbit, pork, you name it. I guess I could get rid of all the things you should eat and just tell you to eat organ meats like the Inuits did. You'd be just fine. But anyways, if you can handle organ meats, which I have trouble with, but I try, uh, brains, gizzards, kidneys, heart, liverwurst, sweetbreads, which is the thalamus gland of a cow, tongue, tripe, all to the good. Seafood and fish, do the wild caught stuff, not farm raised.
Yep.
All shellfish, Alaskan salmon, small fish like anchovies, sardines, and herring. Vegetables, you see the list there, have at it. All you can eat. But however, if you have inflammatory issues, they may be caused by lectins and nightshades, so you may have to be careful about like things like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant.
Yeah.
Fermented foods, great for you. Sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, kimchi, natto, eggs like we just talked about, pastured, salad greens, fine. Common one, iceberg is pretty poor in nutrients, so you're not getting much there. Fruits, avocados, berries, blueberries, blackberries, lemons, limes, olives, occasional melon. Organic dairy, heavy creams, fine butter, sour cream, cream cheese, some cheeses, cottage cheese, full fat yogurt, but good luck finding that on the grocery shelves. You have to take about a half hour to find a full fat one. All the
It's
rest.
really hard. It's rarely. We used to buy yogurt, and that was I could hardly ever find it.
Yeah. Non-dairy beverages. Well, it's not much there. Water, coconut, milk, tea, coffee, and all the rest is junk. Nuts, almonds, coconut, hazelnuts, macadamias are great, high fat content max, pecans and the rest. Seeds very sparingly because of the omega-6 content.
No peanut butter.
No peanut butter. So again, peanuts are a legume, not a nut in the first place. Mushrooms, most varieties in stores. oils, avocados, fine, chicken, duck, goose fat, organic virgin coconut oil, ghee, which is clarified butter. They get rid of the milk solids, non-hydrated lard, macadamia nut oil, extra virgin olive oil, grass-fed tallow, beef kidney suet. Sweeteners, if you must, do some sugar alcohol like xylitol or erythritol. Dark chocolate's okay. As far as what's not so good for you, we already talked about grains, whether refined or whole grains. All the breakfast cereals, bread, pasta, cakes, cookies, all stuff made from wheat, rye, barley, and corn. Avoid or limit most large fish produced in the North Pacific and Gulf of Mexico, including Atlantic salmon, which is not from Atlantic Ocean, by the way. And in fact, now it's pretty much all farm raised. Sea bass, grouper, king mackerel, monkfish, orange roughy, shark, swordfish, perch, halibut, bluefish, all the big fish. And that's all because of the mercury content. Otherwise, that'd be fine. No fast foods, no processed foods, all those genetically modified organisms, no protein bars and energy bars, a bunch of sugar, sodas, fruit juices, sports drinks, refined table salt, use Himalaya salt, no dried fruit, jellies, jams. Again, limit the legumes, dairy, forget the milk, low fat and no fat yogurt, ice cream, sugar. I'm listing about a dozen types of sugar. There's like 40 more. So it's in everything, things you wouldn't even think about.
Right.
Processed seed oils, you want to limit those. All right. So in conclusion, our heart healthy diet of low fat and high carbs has led us down the yellow brick road to an overweight and obese population. Essentially, somewhere over the rainbow, poor Dorothy followed the food pyramid and now has pre-diabetes and not non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in reality, the yellow brick road is really inflammation highway. Our sweet Dorothy could easily be suffering from these conditions as well. Again, diabetes, which begets heart disease, kidney failure, arterial disease and amputations and blindness. Stop listening to the big fat lie. Eat what's natural to humans. A high-fat diet, Homo sapiens and hominins ate for 2.4 million years. Stop eating lectin and phytate containing grains and legumes. Stop eating sugar and processed carbs. Stop using polyunsaturated seed oils to cook. Eat what's natural to humans. No one needs to tell a wild animal what, when, and how much to eat. Or primitive tribesmen don't use calorie charts and personal trainers. Remember that eating fat is how we became human.
Mm.
And lastly, there are two types of animal. Herbivores eat plants. Carnivores eat herbivores. Homo sapiens are 95% carnivore. And it's going to take another 10,000 generations to change that. And here I show you one of the famous carnivores ever, Derek Steven. So with that, thank you. And that concludes my little presentation here.
So with all the data that's been presented to these organizations, the diabetes organizations and everything, the people are supposed to be watching out for our health. Um, why don't they follow the data? What's the
Well, again, Mansell Keys came up with this fat is bad for you. I mean, everybody jumped on that. Now, so the big guy that was supposed to know all this stuff. Again, he advised Eisenhower, all this kind of thing. So he had great sway, and so when everybody jumped on, yeah, fat is bad, without any evidence. And of course, a lot of people were on the other side, but they got shuttled away, and the government came up and sided with guys that said fat was bad. And so once we had the food pyramid out there, and again, like I showed you before, they changed that to my plate in 2011, which is the same stupid advice. And then now they have, other things that are just it's the same advice and they haven't changed. It's pretty sad.
I mean, and it's basically because it's a $1 billion industry, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Just like statins, they already shown not to do anything. In fact, studies show that there's no they did get a meta-analysis on all the studies using statin drugs, and there's no there's no benefit to. The only group that benefited was women or people who already had a heart attack, because statins do act as an anti-inflammatory. So there's some help there. So people already needing to keep their inflammation down, it does that. But they could prescribe a whole bunch of stuff for inflammation that doesn't require a statin drug that's killing your brain and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of dietary advice out there that, we should eat like a carnivore, we should be vegetarian, we should be a vegan, and like 100 things in between that. So whenever people are in doubt as to what to do, I always you should ask yourself, what did nature provide us? I mean, that's why I subtitled this talk, Eat What's Natural to Humans. And what's natural to humans is that which, made us human in the first place, which is a high-fat carnivore diet. Essentially,
Right, which
it's as simple as that. I mean, now, Dan, back when you were a fetus, back in 1979, I never told you this story, but I came across this article out of Russia that promoted underwater birthing. So this is where the mother goes down into the water and you're born underwater.
mhm.
And their notion was that, the fetus is in this fluid environment, and it's such a shock when they come out and they have to breathe air for the first time. So that was the whole notion. Well, so why don't we have them go underwater? Well, to my thinking, what's the difference between that first breath when you come out of the womb or you're coming out of the water? It's the same thing. You gotta draw up sooner or later. So I was thinking to myself, how stupid is this? So if this was natural to humans, I mean, what women have over the course of millennia gone underwater and given birth?
Right,
But
right.
we didn't do that. And so that's not what's natural to humans, to be born underwater. So although our distant cousins, the hominids, started out predominantly as vegetarians, after millions of years, they converted to a high-fat carnivore diet, and in doing so, they became us. So
They
that's
develop their brains, right? And that's how,
yeah.
yeah,
So I
expanded
say
their,
do what's natural. I mean, whenever you're in doubt, what did nature give us? It's not something somebody just concocted and it's the great formula and it's going to save you or do something different. No. So if you're thinking, in fact, they did a study with vegans were involved in the study. And after 5 years, they noted that people with vegans, their brains had shrunk 5% in just like a period of 3 to 5 years, something like that.
wow.
So again, that's not who we are, we've ever been, and we shouldn't be trying to change that.
Have you looked at anything? Obviously, it doesn't sound good to me, but have you looked into the artificial meats, how they can just make what is behind that? Like
Wow.
what is that?
Well, thankfully they make it look like meat, at least so you're not totally barfing before you even eat it. So, but again, it's all going the wrong direction. Uh, and the diet I'm recommending here is, in today's world, it's kind of an expensive diet. I mean, anybody can do it, but there's tens of millions, there's billions of people who have to rely on grains. That's just the way it is. That's not going to change. And so I don't expect them to say, hey, got to eat a high meat diet. Now go up, see if you can afford a few steaks and some fish, and you have 4 kids or whatever. And
Right.
so it's what we should be eating. And if you can do it, you should be doing it. But it's not going to change the world in the sense of what they're throwing at us, which is all this
Right.
genetically modified everything, and everybody's hoarding seeds for later. So that and they're trying to convince through climate change that having eating animals is bad for you and it's taking up too much energy and all that. So there we
Yeah.
are. Not a
It's
force.
been a plan. Obviously, it seems like it's been planned decades long to, make us think that eating what the cheapest thing they can produce for us is going to be the best method. And that's why we're in this mess. But now we've got RFK Jr. in to hopefully help us out in some of those areas, you would think, even though people are screaming about it.
Yeah, well, that's very exciting. I mean, now he's going after some of the other things about, you know, whether it's drugs and that kind of thing. But if it really gets down to the basic stuff we're talking about here and saying, hey, this high carb diet's got to go, that could have some weight. That'd be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what he comes up with. So,
Yeah.
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 It's
Yeah, or
exciting.
at least look at other countries who have banned a whole bunch of substances that are legal in the United States for some reason, but it's like
Right.
at least take that into consideration and look at it, you know.
Yep. We're behind in a lot of things. That's one of them.
At least with RFK Jr., it looks like he wants to look at the data and look at the science. He says, well, if you want me to trust the science, let's actually look at the science in a scientific way and look at the data and look at all the data, the raw data, all of it. Don't just try to skew the data and look at what fits the narrative that you want to say.
Yeah.
So
Let's look at some of the data that the drug companies came up with and decide what passed the test or didn't pass the test and how you should look at data. So yeah,
yeah,
it'd be interesting. Well, we'll
it'll
come
change.
back and maybe talk about some other topic. I don't know what it'll be, but we'll do it again sometime, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing all this information with us and putting it all together. And it's a fascinating story to tell and to open a lot of people's eyes, I think. Yeah.
All right. Well, let me know if I can help. Thanks.
Thanks.
See
Thanks.
you later.
Now, I want you to ask us, what I've told you, is it going to make any difference in your life? You better wake up, better change, get interested, changing your life.